My name is Matt Kane. As Chucker said, I've been doing this for a few years now. This project that I'm talking about today is about evaluating defensive ability using passing data, and my partner in this, Ryan Stinson, who I believe couldn't get across the border because he's still celebrating the Devils lottery win, was really instrumental in this and really drove it all. So I'm up here presenting, but really could not have been done without Ryan. So why is defense so hard to evaluate? Basically, it comes down to the fact that on defense, players have to act as a unit. It's not an individual action. You need 5 people really having everyone do their job, because if even one person messes up somehow, then you get everyone scrambling. It starts to look like a disaster. It starts to resemble that salad that Manny Perry always tweets about, just with pieces all over the place and nothing where it really should be. So, in general, results are really heavily influenced by your teammates. Someone falls over, you end up pinned in your zone for 3 seconds. The other reason is that the data that's available publicly, at least from the NHL, is not very granular. We don't know much about what's going on defensively, because really what we know is the location of a shot, we know who the shooter was, we know which defenders were on the ice, but we don't know if it was me or Eric Carlson out there, which obviously plays a big impact on whether there's actual defensive zone coverage going on. So how can passing data help? The importance of passing has been pretty well established in other sports. If you look at soccer, if you look at basketball, how the ball moves before a shot is taken has a relatively large impact on the likelihood of success for a given shot. Looking back at the SMT presentation, they showed right there with all their data from the World Cup of Hockey that getting movement on the puck can increase the likelihood that the puck will go in. And so from a defensive point of view, if we know the sequence of events that lead up to a shot, that can offer us further clues about who's defensively, quote unquote, responsible for that shot and for the result of any event that occurs. So that segues nicely into the passing project. The passing project was this amazing volunteer effort led by Ryan Stinson, as I mentioned. He did the coordination, he trained all of the volunteer data trackers, he did the data aggregation, he did quality assurance. None of this would have been possible again without him. And the passing project was basically an effort to track all of the passes, or up to 3 passes that preceded any shot attempt during the 2015-2016 season. So for each shot attempt where there was a pass before it, they'd record who made the pass, what zone the pass was in, what lane of the ice the pass was in, what type of pass it was. So perhaps if it was behind the net, if it crossed the Royal Road, that imaginary line down the center of the ice. A whole bunch of data got thrown into a spreadsheet. All of this was gathered together. There were roughly 565 games tracked, so nearly half a season of passing data. Why did people do this? Hockey fans are crazy. Clearly, all of you were here at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning to learn about hockey analytics. So there's a lot of people who will go to extreme lengths to learn a little bit more about the game. So what kind of passes did we track? I mentioned that we tracked all of these attributes. From those attributes, Ryan and I narrowed the data down into 7 basic pass types that sort of bucketed passes by, number 1, like where the puck went, but also how much danger there was in those types of passes. So the first one is, I'm going to call it a pass. It's more of a pass, but rebounds. Rebounds, obviously, there's been a lot written. Rob Petitpiece, Tyler Bello have written in the past about how much more dangerous rebound shot attempts are. Don't really need to explain that. You can see the Corsi shooting percentage there is 13.5%. So that means of the shot attempts, any kind of attempt, whether it goes on net or not, 13.5 of those in our data set went in when they were rebounded. Odd man attempts, shots taken off passes where the number of attackers outnumbered the defending team upon entry into the offensive zone. You can see my terrible attempt at a Leafs joke here, where Zach Hyman is not involved in the play in any way, but still get credit for it. And you can see again, these are very high danger chances, as we'd expect. At the opposite end of that is point shots. Point shots are very low danger shots. The attempts only went in about 5.5% of the time. Royal Road passes, a lot has been done in the online community and the media about how dangerous shot attempts are when the pass that precedes it crosses the middle of the ice. So that's when you're really getting the goalie moving laterally. You're opening up a lot more of the net for the shooter to shoot at. And so these ones went in about 15% of the time. I should note here that this excludes anything on an odd man rush because that gets sort of lumped into the higher category. Ryan has written a lot on the danger of passes coming out from behind the net. That's where you're getting the defender and the goalie churning, so obviously it's a lot more difficult to follow the puck there. And you can see 6.1% is above average for the shooting percentage. And then the last two groups that we have are just sort of buckets for the rest of the passes, passes that didn't really fit into any of the high danger categories. So we split them up into passes that started in the center of the ice between the two face-off dots and in the outside portion of the ice, so outside face-off dots. So how did we use all this data to look at defense? There were two questions that we really wanted to answer, and these are kind of the two questions that often get asked and answered in hockey analytics. First, is this a skill? Is preventing certain types of passes a skill? We know that certain types of passes are more dangerous. Are there players or teams who are better at, for example, preventing odd man rushes, preventing passes from behind? And the second question that we wanted to answer is how predictive is this? Can we use our passing data to create better player or team evaluation tools? So if we look at all the passes, do they give us more information about how talented a player is defensively? And the way we tried to answer that question is creating an expected goals metric. We basically took all of the passes against that the player saw. So you take the 30 behind the net and the 10 odd man rush passes that they had, and then you multiply them by the shooting percentage on those types. So the behind the net are multiplied by 6.1%, the odd man rush by the 17 odd percent. You add those all up, you get the expected goals. Very similar to what you see on Corsica, which uses location. This uses the passes. So, at the team level, what did we find? The first thing is team level passing metrics are repeatable. Hooray, good news. What that means is that systems and tactics can influence what types of passes teams allow. There are going to be coaches, there are going to be teams who are better at playing down low behind their goal line and preventing behind the net passes. Second thing we found, passing expected goals is more predictive than existing metrics. What that means is that it's better to know pre-shot puck movement than just shot location. So knowing that a shot came off of a Royal Road shot attempt, it came from the point, that gives us more information than just knowing that it came from the point or that it was at 30 wide, 110, which I think is actually in the neutral zone or something. And from that, we know that passing data can help evaluate team level strategy and tactical approaches. So one example of this is that Brian did a lot of video work to look at what types of tactics or what types of strategies help prevent dangerous passes. And this is going back to 15-16, so don't think about this past season when you think about these teams. The Panthers used an aggressive half-ice overload system, and from that, within our data set, they had one of the better defenses at preventing dangerous passes. They had the lowest passes against per 60 in the defensive zone in general. Whereas the Avalanche did not do well. Shocking. They played a more passive, where their man-to-man coverage was a lot more strict. Players weren't switching off of each other to cover for each other. And that caused a lot of chaos in the defensive zone. They allowed the most Royal Road shots against per 60 and the fourth most shot attempts on passes from behind the net. At the player level, we see similar things. We see that passing defense is repeatable. There are players who are good or bad at preventing certain types of passes, except for Royal Road against. That's a bit of a small sample issue, just because Royal Road shots are relatively rare. For defensemen, our passing expected goals metric is more predictive than existing metrics. So for defensemen, again, it's better to know the series of passes that preceded than the shot location. For forwards, they were close. Shot location was slightly better, but close in general. And then the other big interesting thing that we found is that player-level passing metrics are somewhat independent. There's weak correlation between them. And what that means is that if you're a defenseman who is really good at preventing behind-the-net passes, you don't let anyone win the puck off of you in your corners, you might not necessarily be a defenseman who is really good at preventing odd man rushes or is really good at clogging up the center of the ice to prevent Royal Road shot attempts. So an example of that would be Hampus Lindholm. He's near the top of the league in odd man attempts against, doesn't allow them. Clearly may play better in transition, but when he gets in his own zone, he's just outside the bottom 10 and behind the net passes. So you can use this information if you're a general manager to help identify where you may have gaps in your team. You may be missing someone who can go into the corner, and you can use passing data to say, there's a guy that I can go out and get, there's a girl I can go out and get, who will fill that gap for me. Let's go to some examples. Players people love or love to hate. I'm going to start with the Sens, where from this data, again, 2015-16, we see some interesting things. The first thing that stood out to me was that Cody Ceci was not bad, despite being having the ire of most of the Sens analytics community. He was not bad for the Sens. He was bad in the team as a whole. You can see his passing expected goals. He was 140th out of roughly 200 people who had more than 200 minutes in that sample. The other interesting thing is Erik Karlsson. He was second best on the team in this sample in Corsi against per 60. So he was really good at preventing shot attempts. But he was in the middle of the team in passing expected goals. And this is something that we saw in a lot of the data with offensively oriented defensemen. They tended to perform a lot worse when you looked at passing metrics. So if you look at the entire Los Angeles blue line, they're a team that always does well by shot attempt metrics, but most of their blue liners rank a lot further down the league when you consider their passing expected goals against. So they're allowing more dangerous shot attempts even though they're not allowing more shot attempts. Someone like Kevin Shattenkirk is the same. The interesting person who is the exact opposite was Dennis Seidenberg, who I think was in the bottom quarter of the league for Corsi, but was in the top quarter of the league for passing expected goals. Was not expected for me. And now players people love or love to hate too, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Three people that stand out here, the dearly departed Frank Toronto, who was first on the team and really high up in the league in passing expected goals. But you can see I swapped out the Corsi column for the goals against column here. He didn't do all that well in terms of actual goals against per 60, which may be one of the reasons he struggled to gain any trust in the system. Whereas you have guys like Roman Polak and Dion Phaneuf, who were average to above average in passing expected goals, but had really great goals against per 60 numbers, and were traded because apparently people looked at those numbers and put a lot of weight on them. I'm not there. All right, so just to wrap everything up, what we showed here is that pre-shot puck movement can have a significant impact on the likelihood of a shot attempt becoming a goal. Passing data can help us evaluate either strategies, tactics. It can help us fill holes on a team in terms of identifying players who may have skills that we don't have, or even identifying what kind of lineups to throw out there, who to use in the defensive zone versus who to start in the offensive zone. In terms of future work, some of the things we're looking at is doing qualitative competition using passing data, or looking at the impact of zone starts on passing defense. If you want to see more of our work, you can go to www.winnersv.com, hockey-drafts.com. I'm on Twitter, Kane_Matt. Ryan's on Twitter, RK_Stim. And lastly, a thank you to all of the detractors. I'm sure some of you are here who made this project possible. It's an insane amount of effort, and you couldn't have done it without you. If your name is not on here and you did do it, it's Ryan's fault that you did this. Thank you.
Questions for Matt? Questions for Matt?
Okay, so one of the questions I had was you said that there's an ability, that there seems to be some talent on the team level in terms of these stats. One thing I'm wondering is, are you able yet to differentiate whether that's a tactical differences between teams, or do some teams just happen to have a lot of players who are good at these things? You know, the coaching versus personnel terms.
It's a tough question to answer primarily because we only have like half a season of data, and so we don't really have a lot of players who switch teams to see how well those skills persisted or their numbers persisted between teams. I suspect it's a little bit of both. My working thesis looking at defense is that coaches and tactics can have a lot stronger impact on defense because you're teaching people where to be and not necessarily an innate ability like Connor McDavid's skating where he can blow by everyone. From the correlation numbers, the team level numbers are obviously a lot higher than the player level numbers. Some of that sample size, but it does sort of lend some credence to the theory that there's some strategy there or some tactics.
Hi there, you said this can be pretty useful for the general manager looking to plug a hole in the lineup, but as you expand your data size on this, what would be used, say, for player development practice more than that? Like you showed down to some home there having huge variances in certain aspects of passing. Seems like to me that could be something very useful to a coach who'd be looking to have a player improve on a specific skill set.
Definitely. I mean, I think this is one of the areas where video work and coaching can tie in really well with the analytic data that we have because we're able to identify like really specific areas of a player's game. So you could look at Hampus Lindholm and you could say, you know, the numbers say you're really bad at allowing these passes. First of all, does the coaching staff agree with that? Does that pass the eye test? And if it doesn't, let's start to drill in on the video and see where these passes are coming from, what the lead up to those plays are, but also, you know, if you look at someone else on the team who's doing it well, you can take that video to Hampus and say, look at his body positioning, look at, you know, how he maintains spacing or how aggressive he is in pursuing people behind the net, and that's what we need you to do, what we need you to work on to go forward.
Thank Matt again.